YouTube, what is up? JP here. So, 68 Chevelle. Last video was the suspension, but the very first video of the series was us wiring in a waterproof fuse box. Can't talk today, apparently. Anyways, so we got the fuse box wired in. Vehicle wouldn't start. Multiple things wrong from the previous installers. We'll kind of go through what I've found so far, what I still have left to do, but we have some fantastic news. This thing runs, it idles, no check engine lights, so it looks like we've figured out all those issues. This motor's been in here 10 years. I believe the previous installer started this thing in 2008. We're now in 2023, so obviously water pump seal, power steering pump's leaking, and the alternator, again from the last video I said, does have a draw. So we're gonna have to replace all the accessories, unfortunately, but it still runs, so that's awesome. But I'll walk you through what I found so far. We'll fire this thing up for you guys. I'll walk you through what I still have to do, and we'll start making another video for you guys. Stay tuned. First and foremost, it's a little dusty in here. It's been sitting a long time, but here is our homemade fuse box. Here is the motor. Got the intake installed. I don't believe on the last video of me doing the fuse blocks, any of the radiator or fans were in. Those are all in, wired in. We still have some wires to wrap, especially down inside here. So when you get back in there and get those wired in, we're able to run this fuse pan, or this a lot of this harness. Another thing that we found, so one of the major reasons this thing was not starting, excuse me, I have this tripod fully extended, so I got down in here and we had the fuse box had multiple wires that were crossed, not running to their correct point. I had no power to the fuel system, nothing like that. So still have to wire in the dash and all these gauges. I just have it setting up here. However, the ignition was not wired right. I found a wire crossed to the ignition, so I had to rewire that, figure that all out. We got that wired, so now we actually can crank the car. What else did we find here? We found part of these wires here coming up to the starter solenoid were crossed and on the wrong side, so they were power all the time, which was causing a whole bunch of issues. So once we got it all wired up correctly, we still couldn't get this thing fired. I was getting zero fuel to the fuel pressure regulator and the fuel rail at the engine block. So come to find out, they had the input and output backwards. So I had to switch these. Then once we got it running, I had to adjust the regulator they put in. It was down to 25 psi. So we got it up to 58 psi, and it runs really well. Couple other things that I had to do was they had wires laying across the headers, not wrapped, so I got them all wrapped down here. We still have a bunch of wires to get into there and wrap that are just bare, and get this one off the header as well. So we'll go ahead and start this thing up, and then we'll talk about what we're doing next. shut off. All right, you guys, so you guys can see it runs, she lives. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna finish up all this wiring, get all our gauges working. We have a brand new center console. I'm not sure if they changed the cover here over the transmission, the tunnel cover. So this is supposed to fit a 68. We have a big gap here before that touches, which lifts the rear up. So we're gonna have to figure that out. Granted, the carpet and the padding will take up a little bit of this gap here, so it won't be too bad. But if we need to make something, we'll make something. Once we get to the point of interior, like I said, we're gonna send this out. We're not doing the interior ourselves. So we do have a Quicksilver shifter. This is through a company that builds this custom fitted for the Quicksilver shifter with a 4L60E transmission like this has with the LS. So it'll be a 4-speed automatic, but it'll look factory, which is what we wanted to kind of go for, is that kind of factory look inside with modern performance under the hood and for the suspension.
I'm having to reach really deep back in here.
So what I'm working with you guys is, this is kind of a rough fitment of this center console. However, if you look here, you can see the gap, and it's just that corner there that's hitting on both sides. So what I think I'm gonna do is shave that corner down, follow the same contour, and I think this thing will sit flush. I've kind of forced it down and test fitted it a few times, so I think that will be what goes in there. And then we got the bracket, kind of temporary place where we're going to need to drill holes. Here's the shifter.
So what we started with here is we took the mounting bracket and we set it in place and marked where the holes are going to be. Using the full center console as the guide, I went ahead and I placed the 2 rear bolts that go on that old rusty bracket there. You place them through the center console, and those 2 bolts are original, so they line right up with the center console. Then you want to carefully move the bracket to where it lines up with the remaining holes with the center console. Take yourself a Sharpie or a marker of some kind, and you're going to mark the holes. This is just a demonstration because I had already done it, but that's about its proper placement there. Another thing to be aware of is when you do start to drill this, go underneath and make sure that you're not drilling into the top of the transmission housing. You want to make sure there's clearance for not only your drill bit, but for the bolts when this thing does get bolted down. Here I'm just using a pilot drill bit, pretty small size. I ended up using self-tapping screws for the upper section of the bracket, and I used a smaller screw that came with the kit, and then I used the bolts that came with the kit in the rear section. The lower right hand bolt, haven't got there yet, but it does have a large opening. I'm sure this is probably there for a reason, such as alignment. So I went ahead and used a washer to hold down the bracket to make it square. Here I'm installing those bolts I was talking about. These are the bolts that came with the kit itself. This is the one I added the washer to. You want to keep it a little loose so that way when you do your final install, you can see and make sure everything lines up.
Alright, you guys, so we're taking a pause on installing that center console. I need to find my hole saw. Ran into another problem, so this is the kit the previous installer ordered. As you can see, 64 to 67 Chevelle gas pedal assembly. This is a 68, and the gas pedal looks like this. So, and unfortunately, I can't find the original bracketry just to reuse this pedal for now, so that sucks. So we're gonna have to get a pedal. So for now, you guys are just gonna watch. I'm gonna go ahead, and this is my supposed harness. Hopefully they wired it all right, but this is my harness for all the gauges. Here's what they did already for the gauges. I found the original ends that go to these two plugs here, so hopefully I can wire these into those and everything works. Here's to hoping.
So basically here what I'm doing is the wiring harnesses are labeled, so I'm just trying to match up the best I can. One's an LS harness, one's a 68 harness, so trying to match up the best I can each wire and verify that they match the respective gauges that the previous installer installed. So I'm gonna go ahead and just give you guys a little bit of music to listen to while we get this done.
Alright, well, we got oil pressure. I'm waiting to see if it'll warm up, check the coolant. We got a tach signal, low idle, battery's been disconnected. The turn signal indicator works, both left and right. Voltmeter is actually working, but I don't know if it's detecting the actual charge because we have this 2 voltmeter wire here, so it's just showing battery voltage and not alternator charge, so I gotta figure that one out. And then I think my fuel gauge, they didn't have the fuel pump wired up right, and I'm wondering if my fuel sending unit's even wired in at all, so I'm gonna have to check that because this thing should have, well, I mean, it's probably got 2 to 3 gallons, so it might actually be empty, but we'll have to add fuel and see if that needle moves.
So here I'm just verifying that the previous installer installed all the wires correctly. These gauges use a lot of shared wires for the backlighting and power and ground. I was just making sure that nothing was crossed. I finished wiring in the rest of the gauges here and the rest of the harness. So I think we're going to end the video here. Like I said, I still got to go get a hole saw for the center console. On our next episode, we'll go ahead and finish installing the rest of that center console for you guys. Thanks for watching.